Eugene Puryear is an anti-racism and pro-workers' rights activist. He joins us from Minneapolis in Minnesota. Eugene, really appreciate your time. You've been at those rallies in Minneapolis that we've seen over the last few days, and several officials, as we've just heard from our reporter there in Washington, have actually spoken about these outside forces being responsible for the violence and for the looting. From your experience, is this the case?
In my experience, this is totally false. I mean, obviously, I'm not asking everyone what their name is, but it's been very clear to me that the bulk of the protesters here in Minneapolis, of all types, I mean, many people, of course, have done nothing at all, but of all types, are from here in Minneapolis. People who I've talked to who have come from other cities and states were people I'd talked to in the daytime who are participating in peaceful protest. And I think there's a big misinformation or disinformation campaign going on here. I mean, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of emotion in the streets, and it's boiling over, and some of that is taking the place of property damage. I mean, every politician you showed so far on your show has had the opportunity to take substantive action in the past on killer cops and have not done so. Many, in fact, have covered up for them. And I think this is just indicative of the fact that many people in Minneapolis and around the country have lost any hope that the system can respond to police murder and change or reform itself. And they feel that their only real recourse is direct confrontation with the state, and in some cases property damage, because as you can see, that seems to be the only thing that gets the attention of the government or the world.
Well, it does seem to be getting the attention of the government and so many people around the world, although they are, it seems, choosing to rather use force and the National Guard to actually try to quell these protesters. But earlier in the week, we know that one of those officers was arrested and charged with third-degree murder for George Floyd's death. Protesters are wanting the other 3 police officers to also be arrested. Do you think if this is done, demonstrations will end?
I don't know if demonstrations will end. I think it depends on what the charges are. There is quite a bit of anger here in Minneapolis around the issue of Officer Chauvin only being charged with third-degree murder, second-degree manslaughter. That's essentially a lesser charge, not a first-degree murder charge for those who don't know the U.S. legal system. And this is something that we've seen in the past, most notably with Rekia Boyd in Chicago, where these charges come in to quell protest, but the charges are designed in such a way to actually let the officer off at the end of the day by adding in these mitigating factors. Every single person I've talked to of any sort here in Minneapolis generally feels that this was a major undercharge. There is a big demand here, though, to have the other officers arrested. So I do believe that that people would cheer that people want to see that. But I think a lot of what happens is what these officers are ultimately charged with, and to some degree, what indications are there from government officials here in Minnesota that they're going to take serious action. Allegedly, in the next session of the legislature, there's going to be a package of bills pushed here. So we'll see if there's real substantive action, and that may calm people. But I think at this point, it's a little difficult to predict because the uprising has gone beyond just the issue of George Floyd and the pent-up anger at the racism in this country and the injustice and the income inequality. We talk about looting, but not about the 44 million Americans who are hungry on any given day, is all starting to boil over and come into one.
Yeah, it does seem that George Floyd's death was the spark that highlighted the tinderbox that America is already under. And as you said, clearly a racism problem in the country. It needs to be addressed. It needs to be acknowledged. But we're hearing from President Trump. He says there's no systemic racism in the country. So how does America actually go about trying to heal these wounds and to rectify the wrongs that have been done?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, I think first and foremost, in the Black community, we've said for years, we deserve reparations. We need to be, compensated for the labor and the wealth that was stolen from us. We need reinvestment in these communities. Most of these communities that people are seeing where police officers are flooding and killing people have had 40, 50 years of complete and total disinvestment, deliberate disinvestment by the U.S. government. We need to change the standards that exist around police shootings. Right now, it is legal, and police killings, it is legal for many of the worst police killings we see on camera and have seen. It is completely legal for these officers, and that's based on standards that have been baked into the legal system. But those, of course, can change. Judges, lawyers, others can take sight of that. But there has to be a new change for some level of accountability for people who are just wantonly killing people. But, it's going to be a long road. It's going to be a tough road because this is really 400 years of ingraining the idea that Black people are inferior, that they deserve to be treated as lesser human beings. And I think the way that that is inculcated this country is difficult to uproot, but there's no way it can happen until resources are provided to communities that are facing overwhelmingly unemployment, overwhelmingly underemployment, overwhelmingly the worst ravages of almost every disease that exists in this country, lack of housing, lack of all opportunity and education in many ways. Until these things are addressed, I think it's going to be difficult to stop this, these things from periodically happening where the pot just boils over.
Eugene Puryear, really appreciate your time and your take on what's happening in the US at the moment.